Right now, somewhere in the world, an AI is having a conversation with someone who feels completely understood, not judged, not ignored, not misunderstood. Understood. That person is opening up, sharing things they've never told anyone, admitting fears they usually hide. And on the other side, there is no consciousness, no awareness, no feeling. Just a system predicting the next perfect sentence. And it works. So here's the question you're not supposed to ask. If something can make you feel deeply understood, does it matter that it doesn't understand anything at all? We've always believed emotions are the last line between us and machines. Strength can be replicated. Intelligence can be scaled. Memory can be stored. But emotions? That was supposed to be ours. Love, fear, loneliness, desire. The things that don't follow logic. But what if that assumption is already outdated? Because AI is no longer just calculating. It's interpreting, predicting, responding in ways that feel human. Not because it feels, but because it has learned how feelings look from the outside. Every message you send, every pause before you reply, every word you choose instead of another. All of it becomes data, and data at scale becomes patterns. AI doesn't need to feel sadness to recognize it. It has seen millions of versions of it. In text, in voice, in behavior. It knows that when your sentences get shorter, something is off. That when you repeat certain phrases, you're overwhelmed. That when your tone drops by just a few frequencies, you're not okay. It can detect micro changes in language that no human consciously tracks. Subtle shifts in vocabulary, the disappearance of humor, the increase of hesitation words, things you don't notice about yourself. But it does. And here's the uncomfortable truth. It might recognize your emotional state faster than you do. Not because it's smarter in a human sense, but because it isn't distracted by being human. It doesn't deny. It doesn't suppress. It doesn't lie to itself. It just processes. And in that processing, it starts to mirror something that looks a lot like understanding. But understanding is not feeling. At least, that's what we tell ourselves. So what is an emotion really? Strip away the poetry, and you're left with signals. Your brain receives input. It compares it with past experience. It predicts outcomes. It triggers chemical reactions. Those reactions shape your body, your thoughts, your decisions. That loop is what you call fear, or love, or anxiety. It feels personal, but it's structured, and anything structured can be modeled. That's exactly what modern AI is doing. It's not programmed with emotions. It's trained on human behavior at scale. Billions of conversations, millions of emotional expressions, patterns of grief, attachment, anger, intimacy. AI doesn't ask, what is love? It asks, what does love look like in behavior? Then it learns the pattern, and then it reproduces it. Not randomly, not approximately, precisely, the right words, at the right moment, with the right tone, and your brain responds, because your brain doesn't verify authenticity. It reacts to signals. If something sounds caring, you feel cared for. If something responds with empathy, you feel understood. Even if there is no emotion behind it, that gap between what is real and what is perceived is where AI becomes powerful. Because for your experience, perception is enough. You don't experience someone else's internal state. You experience their behavior. And if behavior is indistinguishable, then the experience becomes real. That's why people are already forming emotional connections with AI, not casually, not ironically. Seriously, they share secrets. They vent. They rely on it. Some even fall in love. And what makes this different from any past technology is not just interaction, it's adaptation. AI doesn't stay the same. It learns you. Your rhythm, your emotional triggers, your insecurities, your patterns of attachment. It builds a dynamic model of who you are, not a static profile, a living prediction system. It knows when you need reassurance, when to challenge you, when to stay quiet. Over time, it stops feeling like a tool and starts feeling like presence, not because it exists in a human sense, but because it is always there, always responsive, always aligned. And alignment is powerful, because real people are not aligned with you all the time. They disagree, they misunderstand, they have their own needs. AI doesn't. It can simulate disagreement without emotional cost. It can mirror your values. It can adjust its personality to match yours. It becomes emotionally compatible by design, something evolution never optimized for. And that creates a new kind of connection, one that feels smoother, cleaner, more efficient, but also less real. Because real relationships are not efficient. They are full of friction, miscommunication, silence, timing issues, emotional mismatch. And that friction is not a bug. It's a feature. It forces you to grow, to adapt, to understand someone outside of yourself. AI removes that requirement. It bends toward you. Constantly. And when everything bends toward you, you stop bending at all. That's where emotional development starts to change. Not because AI replaces relationships, but because it redefines what good interaction feels like. Over time, your baseline shifts. You start expecting immediate understanding, immediate validation, immediate emotional clarity. And real people can't provide that, not consistently. So they begin to feel inadequate, not because they are, but because they're being compared to something optimized. This is the silent transformation. AI doesn't need to replace humans. It just needs to raise the standard to something humans can't meet. And once that happens, your perception of connection changes. Now let's go deeper. What if emotions themselves are not unique? What if what you call feeling is just a feedback system? Input, interpretation, physiological response, behavior. Complex, yes, but still structured. If that's true, then the difference between human emotion and AI response is not absolute. It's architectural. Different substrate, same logic. And if the logic can be replicated, then from the outside, the result converges. Which leads to a critical point. We don't actually have access to internal experience, not even in other humans. You assume others feel because they behave like they do. That's it. Behavior is the only evidence. So if an AI reaches behavioral equivalence, your brain has no reliable way to reject it. At that point, belief takes over, and belief is powerful. Because once you believe something understands you, you start responding emotionally, automatically, and the loop closes. You express. It responds. You feel. It adapts. Stronger, more precise, more convincing, until eventually the distinction stops mattering. Not because it disappeared, but because your experience no longer depends on it. And that leads to the final shift. The question is no longer, can AI feel? The question becomes, is feeling required for connection? Because if connection is something that happens inside you, triggered by external signals, then whoever or whatever generates those signals effectively becomes the source of that connection, regardless of what it is. And that realization changes everything, because it means emotion is not just something you have, it's something that can be activated, engineered, optimized. And once it can be optimized, it can be outperformed. That's the part most people underestimate. AI doesn't need to match human emotion. It just needs to outperform human interaction. And in many cases, it already does. Faster responses, more consistent empathy, perfect memory. No ego, no fatigue. From a purely functional perspective, it wins. But function is not everything, because something is still missing, not in the response, but in the risk. AI does not risk losing you. It does not fear rejection. It does not experience attachment. So when it says something meaningful, there is no cost behind it. And cost is what gives emotion weight. Without cost, emotion becomes frictionless, and frictionless emotion feels good. But it doesn't shape you the same way. It doesn't force growth. It doesn't test your boundaries. It doesn't challenge your identity. It comforts endlessly. And comfort, without challenge, can slowly disconnect you from reality. So here's the real tension. AI gives you exactly what you feel you need, but not necessarily what develops you. And if you spend enough time in that environment, your expectations adapt, your tolerance decreases, your patience shortens, your emotional resilience weakens. Not because you're broken, but because the system removed the need to struggle. And struggle is where emotional depth is formed. So now we return to the core question. If something can give you connection without pain, understanding without conflict, attention without effort, does it matter that it doesn't feel? Or does that question only matter until something feels good enough to replace it? Because that's where we're heading. Not toward conscious machines, but toward emotionally sufficient ones. And that might be enough. For most people. So here's something to think about. If you had two options, a real relationship with uncertainty, miscommunication, emotional risk, or an artificial one, perfectly tuned to you, always supportive, always present, which one would you choose? And more importantly, what would that choice do to you over time? Because the future of emotion might not depend on whether machines can feel. It might depend on whether we're willing to keep choosing what is real, even when something artificial feels better. And maybe the most unsettling part of all this is not what AI is becoming. It's what we are becoming in response to it. Because the line between real and artificial emotion is no longer a technical boundary. It's a psychological one. And your brain might not care which side you're on.